Hey, I just needed to hop on here and tell you something that I saw in the Wall Street Journal article. I don't know if you saw it. I read the whole piece about how Americans are leaving in record numbers, and I know you're super overwhelmed right now with everything you've got going on, trying to figure out if you're going to leave, when you're going to leave, how you're going to leave. If you read this article, I need to dispel some things that were incorrect because they could really mess you up regarding living in Europe. So, one of the things that they actually said in two different ways in the article, it was just like a sloppy mistake, which I can explain. But the other one is something that could actually get you banned from being in Europe. And so that's a real problem. I was honestly shocked. So I just wanted to drop in here really quick and let you know. I'm Andy. I moved abroad in 2019. I've been living with my family of 7 in Europe for the last 5 years. So honestly, I was just really annoyed by this because when you're talking about families moving their whole entire life across borders, you really need to be precise in your language, especially around legal realities like visas and permission for how long you're going to be able to stay somewhere. And that's where the problems were in the article. So, I mean, the article was a really interesting read. I'm sure that since you are currently in this process, articles like this in major newspapers are pretty interesting to you. And they're not wrong. A lot of Americans are leaving. They showed some charts on Portugal, and I can attest to it, having lived here. They showed some charts on Ireland. I mean, the numbers, since I moved here in 2022, I think the numbers have tripled of American citizens who are living here in Portugal. Two immigration issues were wrongly explained in the article or like alluded to. One of them has to do with Albania. As you may have seen, and if you haven't, check it out. Oh, I think it's on this side. Check it out. I actually have 2 videos on Albania because I think it's such an amazing opportunity for Americans, especially if you're not sure where you want to be long term. So the article refers to Albania as having a special visa. Later, it makes the mistake again and calls it an American visa. This doesn't exist. Albania is a visa-free country. There is not some special visa that you have to apply for in order to go to Albania. So there are 2 countries off the top of my head that I know that allow you to stay for a year just with your passport, not with a visa, no application process, no getting approved for like specific dollar amounts that you make, none of that. 2 countries, Georgia and Albania. And Albania is obviously like more central in Europe and closer to get to other stuff. Also, Albania is relatively more stable at this point compared to Georgia because of political things that are going on. I lived in Georgia for over a year. We used the visa-free option. So what you get is you show up at the border to Albania or to Georgia. You're an American, you have an American passport, and you show them the passport and they let you in as a tourist. So, I mean, I understand how people can get this wrong, but I think it's pretty irresponsible for such a huge news outlet to get it wrong because you don't need a visa to enter Albania or Georgia. You need your passport, and you're there as a tourist. You're not on some residency path, and I think that's where the confusion is. When I moved to Portugal, I had to apply for the pass that leads to residency. I had to show 300 pieces of paperwork to the embassy, to the Portuguese embassy in America. To get approval, I had to show bank accounts. I had to show that I had insurance. I had to show that I had an education plan for my kids. It's a massively intense process. And then once they approved everything, they did give me a visa. A visa is usually a stamp, not a stamp, a sticker usually, a sticker that goes into your passport. It requires a very long process, at least in Portugal. Now, there are visa upon arrival. So other countries have a visa where you're coming and you're getting a tourist visa, not a residency visa, or not a digital nomad visa. There's not a big process, but you have to show your passport and you have to pay a fee. So visas all involve fees. What happens in Albania and Georgia doesn't involve a fee. You're literally allowed, in the status of a tourist, to stay in those countries for a year. So a visa is legal status that you apply for and are granted, or in some countries you show up and you pay a fee and they say you can stay for 30 days, you can stay for 60 days based on, whatever the rules are in that country. Visa means paperwork, or at least a paid process of some sort. So the fact that they made this mistake twice in the full article really is concerning to me, because I don't want you to misunderstand what's happening when you go to Albania, because a lot of times a visa process means that you can turn it into a residency process, that time that you're spending counts towards your residency ultimately. It varies by country. You have to look into those details. So to sum up, Albania is a great option for Americans to come in based on your passport. It's literally, they are letting you in based on passport privilege, which, take whatever routes you can right now if you're really serious about leaving. Now, this one is the one that can get you kicked out of Europe, and so please listen up. The context was Europe specifically, and they were talking about a loophole where you can leave and reset your 90-day window, because in Europe, not all of Europe, but in the Schengen area, you are only allowed to stay for 90 days in every 180 days. So it's sort of a complicated rolling calculator that is needed to figure out if you've overstayed or not. But if you overstay, it's a big deal. Like right now, I'm waiting to travel anywhere within Schengen because I am waiting on my residency card because it was expired due to no fault of my own. The system is really, really behind here. But if I show up in Germany or in Spain or Italy or any of the other Schengen countries, they are going to see how long I've been in Europe. And because I can't show them a valid residency card for Portugal, they're going to say, you've overstayed. I've stayed much longer than 90 out of 180 days because I live here. Giving people the idea that there's a loophole, that's not good. Because if you stay more than 90 days out of every 180-day period, this could cause you a lot of problems, a lot of heartache. You could get kicked out of the Schengen area. You could get banned from coming back. They don't like you to stay over your 90 days within 180, and they will count it. Different countries are more chill or less chill, but they are serious about it. This is a Schengen-wide policy. I can't remember how many countries are in Schengen versus the EU. The EU has 27 countries, I believe, but Schengen allows free travel, like similar to how we travel between states. In the US, you're not having to show your ID like you would when you're entering a new country. Schengen allows that kind of travel, but when you are stamping in with an immigration official or when you're exiting, they are looking to see how long you've been in that whole zone of countries. Literally, you can only stay 90 days out of 180, even if you move countries. So all of that has to add up. Spain added to your time in France, added to your time in Italy, added to your time in Germany, added to your time in Portugal. Like, you can't stay in those countries more than 90 days total at a time on your passport. And it does not reset because you left for a weekend. There's a term that people use for countries that are more lax about this called a visa run, which, again, it's a misnomer because it's not having to do with visas. It's literally having to do with like tourist resets usually, and not getting like a whole new sticker in your passport and permission that you have to pay for. So in Southeast Asia, this is a really common concept, but even in Southeast Asia, they're becoming more strict. So for instance, in Thailand, it was more common before that you could reset your whole time by leaving, going over the border, and coming back in. That's not really the case anymore in Thailand, I've heard. And in a lot of places, they're becoming much more strict. Some people would do a border run in a day. They would cross the border, that would reset their time, and they'd re-enter, and then they'd stay however long tourists can stay. And so that was a strategy that worked in Southeast Asian countries before. I'm sure that it still works in some of the less popular countries, but they've gotten a lot more strict in Indonesia. They've gotten a lot more strict in Thailand, for sure. I know about those. So this concept of the loophole of crossing the border has previously been a thing, and it may still be a thing in certain places, but that is definitely not the EU. The EU and Schengen are very strict. They are rule-based and they are math-based. So please don't count on any loopholes when it comes to staying in Europe long-term. Also, if you're not good at math like me, and the idea of a rolling 180 days breaks your brain, there are apps for this. I will link it in the description. Comment for me and let me know if you've even heard of Schengen. It's spelled Schengen. If you are wanting to move to Europe and you have never heard of Schengen, you're gonna need to Google that like today, just to understand the difference between Schengen and the EU. So there are 3 totally different move abroad strategies that are getting interchangeably used in the terminology in this article. One of the concepts is tourist rotation strategies, which is a thing, and I actually encourage people to do it. But you cannot reset your Schengen by leaving. What you can do is spend 90 days within the whole Schengen zone. You can go somewhere outside of Schengen and spend the number of days that that country allows you, which often is 90 days as well. For instance, Ireland is outside the Schengen zone. On a US passport, you are allowed to be there for up to 90 days. And so you could move from Schengen to Ireland, but you'd only be staying 90 days in Ireland, and Schengen does count by the day. And if you leave on a day, that day is counted. And so the safest way to do this kind of strategy is literally having a buffer country. So for instance, you want to stay in France just based on being a tourist with your passport. Okay, you're allowed to be there 90 days out of every 180. You can move from there over to Ireland. You can stay in Ireland up to 90 days as a tourist on your US passport. Now, you haven't really reset until you spend a 1 or 2 more day buffer, would make me feel most comfortable. So what you could do is hop over to the UK for just a couple of days because they have separate numbers. Ireland and the UK have separate numbers. So if you move from Ireland to the UK, go to London for a weekend or whatever, now your time on your passport as a tourist in Schengen will have been reset because you spent 90 days out and then you spent 2-3 more days as a little buffer, And now it's been 180 days total, and you can go back into the Schengen zone. You can go back to France, or you can go to Portugal, or you can go to Italy. But it's very important to be counting. It's very, very important to understand who is in Schengen in Europe and who is not in Schengen, because if you want to do this kind of strategy, you could do this for a while. You could slow travel through Europe for years using this kind of strategy, but you just need to mix in the right countries, and you need to understand which ones are actually in Schengen, which ones are out, and you need to understand exactly how many days you are allowed to be in each of those places. That is a favorite strategy of mine to suggest. Some people call it the Schengen shuffle, but that is something I can help with. If you're interested in slow travel through Europe, this is an amazing time in history to try that. However, you really need to know the rules so that you don't get kicked out of Europe. Another of the ideas that sort of got mushed in and used interchangeably is the visa-free year in a country. So that would be Albania. They didn't mention Georgia, but that would also be Georgia. You walk in with your passport. You can come as a tourist, as a US citizen right now in March 2026. And that's a visa-free stay. There's no special visa. There's no American visa. It's a visa-free stay. And those countries often make a great first stop while you're figuring out your long-term plan. That's exactly what happened for us in Georgia. And then the third idea is actually visas. This is where you should be using the word visa in regards to Europe. These are residency paths to stay longer than the 90 days out of 180. The visa path, or the long-term residency path, that's things like a digital nomad visa, a remote work visa, I just talked about one in Italy. You can look at that video here. And it's like for retirees. They don't call it a passive income visa, but it means that you're not actively working. So there's all types. All across Europe, there's all types of visas that do allow you to stay for a year and then renew for another year. Or in Portugal, there's a 2-year, and then you can renew for a 3-year, as long as you still are able to meet the requirements. But those paths are paperwork heavy. They involve staying in the US while you wait to hear from an embassy from that country. The embassies are probably very busy right now. The Portuguese embassies in America are probably swamped. And that is unfortunate, because even those of us who have been here for a while, the immigration system here is very slow. They've restructured it, I think, 3 times since I moved here in 2022. So these processes take longer. They involve money, proving money, showing bank account amounts, showing how often you have money coming in. You have to pay money to get a visa. So when you blur them, moving abroad sounds like trendy, like something everybody's doing. And that is not the case. Moving abroad is complex. You need to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot that you need to understand legally and in your own preferences and nervous system before you try and move abroad. So I feel like an article like this makes it sound like, oh, everybody's going. While the numbers are increasing, it is not simple, and having support from somebody who recognizes mistakes in articles like this is something that you could really benefit from. When you separate these ideas, you can actually build a strategic plan, and that is what I help with. I understand the big picture of all of your different options. I understand you by talking to you and hearing the things that are involved in your life. And then I can help you build out your strategy for your get me out of here plan. In summary, When you're writing about thousands of people leaving their home country to live somewhere else, wording matters. Visa-free entry on a passport is not a visa. A border hop is not a reset that allows you to just go right back in and have another 90 days. And a temporary stay as a tourist is not residency. If your move abroad plans on loopholes and vague language, you don't have a plan. You have a gamble. And I know a lot of you with families don't want to be gambling with your future. You're not able to fly by the seat of your pants. I understand. I have 5 kids. I don't want that for you. So I'm really curious. I know that you're just trying to weigh your options, but are you planning on leaving in the next 12 months? If you are, comment down below 12. Maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself, or just comment 12 that you're planning on leaving in the next 12 months. When you do that, it helps me make better content for you. If you want clear, accurate breakdowns like this, please subscribe. I don't want you showing up to Europe on vibes and misinformation from news outlets. Life is already chaotic enough with a political zombie apocalypse in America. So don't let that happen to you. And if you are ready to make a strategy, book a get me out of here plan. It's in my description. I would love to support you and help you make a strategic plan for your next moves as you launch.